Good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to today's discussion session of Talking Films Online. TFO was founded in June 2020 during the lockdown by Professor Nikhila and Dr. Geeta Vishwanath. Almost on a whim, it has grown from a spontaneous idea to a vibrant community of film enthusiasts, including scholars, researchers, students, teachers, and passionate lovers of cinema. Every Saturday at 9 p.m. on Zoom, we come together to discuss films from across the world. The format is quite simple yet effective. Someone from our group selects a film, we all watch it in our own time, and then we meet to discuss. Over the years, we have also been joined by notable filmmakers, editors, and cinematographers, including Aparna Sen, Amol Palekar, Girish Kasrabali, and Adur Gopalakrishnan. TFO's cinematic journey has witnessed films through various lenses. It includes hosting themed festivals on East European, Iranian, and Oman cinema, among others. Every June, we host a smartphone short filmmaking contest for students and organize a lecture series in university departments to mark TFO's anniversary. Last September, we also organized our first offline event, an international seminar on Indian cinema in the digital era, held in collaboration with FCT Baroda. Tonight's discussion will focus on Ritwik Ghatak's film Meghe Dhaka Tara, or The Cloud-Capped Star, as part of our ongoing Ghatak Centenary Festival. Our discussion shall be initiated by Jenisha Borah, a PhD candidate from the University of Chicago in the Department of Cinema and Media Studies. She is finishing her dissertation titled Intimate Cartographies, Maratha Mandir and the Cinema Experience in Mumbai. Her work has been supported by the Committee on South Asian Studies and Center for Study of Gender and Sexuality at the University of Chicago, and also by American Institute of India Studies. Her research and teaching interests are film and gender, urban studies, South Asian cinema, New Wave Japanese cinema, queer theory, and subcultures. We are honored to have you with us, ma'am, and we look forward to an interesting and thought provoking conversation tonight. Over to you.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you to Shirley for that introduction and to Tio for giving me this opportunity to talk about one of the greatest films by Ghatak. And before that, I just want to ask, like, am I audible and clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, okay. Okay, so before I start, I would say a few things actually. That this presentation would be in the form of a paper because I have dealt with certain arguments and certain ideas about certain scenes. B, I actually went through the our I actually went through our WhatsApp group chat today and saw that there is a certain space to talk about the language in the film, uh, which is again highlighted by especially the last line, I wanted to live, or whether I want to live. So the disclaimer is that I am not a native Bengali speaking person. So although I know how to speak Bengali or understand Bengali a little bit, I don't claim the expertise to understand the nuances, especially of the partition Bengali language. So, for me, the discussion about language right now would be outside the purview of this presentation. And yeah, before I actually go to the presentation, I would actually start with an anecdote about how I came to hear about Ghatak. So when I was a child, my mother used to actually sometimes just, talk about her pre-married days of going to cinema theater and watching films. And in one of those occasions, she mentioned Ritwik Ghatak, and I was still a child. Obviously, I have not come across his films yet. Um, So my mother, who's not very expressive with words, and she mentioned that she had watched Meghe Dhaka Tara. I did not even understand what Meghe Dhaka Tara was. So, but when she mentioned Meghe Dhaka Tara and Ritwik Ghatak, she only described one scene from the film, which was the very famous the slipper scene, the chappal scene, which happens almost at the introductory part of the narrative. So that kind of stayed with me. That scene, because and the interesting thing is, I have never heard my mom ever describe a scene of the movie that she ever seen. I mean, she would say it was good, it was bad, I really enjoyed it and all, but she never put words into certain scenes. So this scene stayed with me, and years later, when I actually watched the film, it had a different kind of a meaning for me, because like, why exactly this scene? And so my presentation would today like focus on a few things, but will recur and come back to this scene, like why Nita and the slipper scene, which has been written about like many times in Western academia, as well as in the regional academy as well. So considering that, I start my presentation with the title that I have actually named for this presentation or the paper is The Ordinary Woman in Extraordinary Times, The Trauma of Partition and Gendered Violence in Ritwik Ghatak's Meghe Dhaka Tara. The 1947 partition of the Indian subcontinent into the nation states of India and Pakistan is one of the most significant political events of the 20th century, a historical tragedy whose legacy is felt and lived till today. Both popular and scholarly imaginations have sought to represent the great violence and trauma characterizing the geographical rift. Cinematic responses to the Indian partition have in turn paid considerable attention to the experiences and roles of women in the midst of tumult in which they become a vulnerable underclass that were the soft targets of violence. Much like the early nationalist discourse in South Asia emphasized the female body as a site of culture and tradition, cinematic representations of the partition and its aftermath, such as in films like Chinnamul, Garam Hawa, Tamas, and films of Ritwik Ghatak, have similarly used the sight of women's bodies as metaphors for displacement and enduring trauma brought about by the partition. Now, I did mention Ritwik Ghatak with the other films like Chinnamul, Garam Hawa, and Tamas. There is a one key difference in both in this category, where it keeps Ritwik Ghatak apart from the other films, which is very obvious that all these films were actually talking about the India Pakistan partition, and Ritwik Ghatak is talking about the second partition of East Bengal, and this actually I was watching now. Before I go into the paper, I would like to actually footnote with something that I heard over the past few years and within my Bengali friend circle. And they would say that whereas the rest of India had the trauma of one partition, we Bengalis had the trauma of two partitions, so the subsequent. So I think that has been like very much inherent in what Ritwik Ghatak has been dealing with in terms of expressing his trauma through his films. Now, the cinematic over of Ghatak in particular demonstrates what cultural historian Manishita Das has called a thematic obsession with the partition and its far reaching social, cultural, and political consequences for the people of Bengal. Ghatak's films generally situate the partition in terms of both the context and the subtext, and often explore the corrosive impact of the event on everyday middle class life in post independence Bengal. The women of Ghatak's partition films come to serve an important symbolic roles that reveal the contradictory realities that many middle class women faced in the post 1947 South Asia, where partition on one hand created the experiences of gendered violence and trauma, but on the other hand, also ushered in an era of women inhabiting public and political spaces previously denied to them. Ghatak's Meghe Dhaka Tara, a part of his partition trilogy, takes up many of those themes and, most importantly, uses gendered violence as a way to depict the long shadow of partition. In this film, Ghatak utilizes the challenges faced by his female characters to depict a lingering legacy of post partition socio-economic displacement and rootlessness on the larger body politic and the individual unit of the family. Meghe Dhaka Tara's fractured and disintegrating family is the site where the larger spatial and social displacements are mapped, and women's desire for mobility, whether it be sexual, emotional, or economic, are restrained, repressed, and thwarted. All this is suggestive of the impossibility of requited romance in a time of political upheaval, economic stagnation, and cultural enemy. My analysis of this film will argue that the violence and the trauma of the partition is played out through the story of the protagonist Nita within a spectrum of failed romance. Through Nita's failure to aspire to conventional romance or reach the cinematic climax of a happy marriage with a lover, and her experience of emotional intimacy within a brother-sister relationship, Ghatak demonstrates how, in a post-partition social order, happiness may only be found in rare moments of love that are unconventional and transgressive. That is to say, through a rupture or inversion of the normative kinship structures. Following this, I also argue that this rupture denies women the ability to express their own erotic and romantic desires with any agency. The narrative of Meghe Dhaka Tara not only ensures that the woman protagonist is denied of any romantic union with her lover, but also ends with a climactic moment of disease and death of her physical body. Utilizing the symbolism of the female body in a post-partition milieu, Meghe Dhaka Tara demonstrates how women's bodies ultimately bear the brunt of the trauma and violence of partition and absorb the displacement and disease created in the aftermath. Now, this section, I'm going to talk about what I mean by the ordinary woman. The first of the partition trilogy, the other two being Kumal Gandhar and Subarna Rekha, Meghe Dhaka Tara is Ritwik Ghatak's cinematic meditation on the trauma of partition. In Ghatak's cinema, kinship and familial relations are recurring themes that drive the narrative plot. Social displacement, poverty, and disillusionment rendered by partition are reflected onto the crisis of familial relations. Bhaskar Sarkar notes that in this radical unraveling of familial relations, Ghatak captured a burgeoning sense of national crisis and points to its roots in the contradictions inhering in the contemporary social structures. In his films, the personal is concomitant with the socio-historical condition of a truncated Bengal. Ghatak deploys the melodramatic narrative plot of a woman's unassailable personal tragedy against the socio-historical tragedy theme of partition. Even though there is no direct reference to the historical event, Ghatak pushes the partition narrative as a subtextual undertone of the film. Just as post-partition violence registered in the everyday lives of the displaced refugee families, the filmmaker suggests that in the wake of an emerging urbanity of Kolkata and a new national identity, so too did the violence of partition seep into the everydayness of a fledgling urban identity for refugees. In Meghe Dhaka Tara, violence ceases to be disruptive aberration, but is woven into the folds of the quotidian experience of these refugee families who struggle to find economic independence while desiring an elusive social coherence. The film begins with a glimpse into the lives of the refugee families from East Bengal whose fortunes have been shattered by the partition. In the refugee colony, marked by the use of the East Bengali dialect, there are makeshift houses made of bamboo leaves that are precariously holding together in a small space. a place where Nita's educated family are housed. It is obvious that the family had seen better times in a near past that has now slipped into the realm of memory. The opening scene in the film alludes to this as it focuses on a vast landscape lined with trees where Nita's brother Shankar does his morning singing practice amidst a train that passes in the background. And you can see in my background, this is one of the introduction scenes where he is practicing and Nita then arrives. Then the train suggests a spatial mobility that is set against the refugee families' lack of social and economic mobility. The opening scenes further point to economic distress that the family is in. For instance, on seeing Nita, the colony shopkeeper reminds her that her father owes him considerable amount in dues. And when Shankar comes to ask him for a favor, the shopkeeper tells him that the entire family subsists on credit. It is in this same opening sequence that the physical pain and the suffering inflicted on her body is introduced. In one of the scenes of the film after this, where Nita is showing to returning home, uh, the the first movement of the camera focuses on the injury of her feet as her slippers are torn. She takes off the slippers and walks bare feet in a symbolic moment that clearly shows the intense privation that she has taken upon herself. We are also introduced to her parents in an early sequence, along with the silhouette of her younger sister, who walks, like in the rest of the film, with a seductive and a languorous gait. It is contrasted with Nita's bare feet and rather somber walk, which is both exhausted and purposeful. Her father, an idealistic schoolmaster dressed absurdly in a suit and looking out of place in the tattered hut in which he currently resides, protests loudly at his wife for calling their daughter dark because it implies that she is not conventionally beautiful. He emphasizes that Nita's great sense of responsibility. She teaches two tuition class after finishing her own master's, in addition to doing household work. While Nita's father appreciates her contributions, her mother expresses annoyance and intolerance towards her father's tendency to chatter. She asks him to leave for the school where he has presumably taken up a teaching job, even though education sector has struggled a great deal in the post-partition Kolkata, as well as elsewhere in South Asia. This declaration that education grants are about to be stopped altogether is again a contrasted image with a group of young school children singing the national anthem. Through this framing and arrangement of scenes, Ghatak establishes early on in the film that the idea of independent India and the project of national reconstruction is a doomed project, a sham of sorts in which the displacement and exile of millions can hardly be wished or forgotten away. This is a clear sense that the myth of Indian nationalism or national unity cannot fully integrate the bodies and the lives of the displaced, who will never completely be transformed into an equal subject citizen. Through the early character development of Nita and her tendency towards physical suffering, such as when she accepts that her slippers are torn, that she can't afford to repair them, forcing her to walk barefoot, we see that such women who embrace traditional roles that ordain self denial and deprivation will be the greatest sufferers and victims of partition. Now, continuing on the same trope about what it actually disenfranchises the women in a post-partition era, I have this analysis of the film, which I'm going to now discuss. But I would actually say, is Sangeeta here? Because this part of the paper is actually very much, how would I say, would say thanks to Sangeeta in a way for fortifying my claim, and which is the brother sister relationship. And at one point of time, I think Sangeeta in the second or the first session did mention Ghatak's own relationship with his twin sister, which I did not know at that point of time. But when I heard Sangeeta said that, and then I looked at look back at my notes, it perfectly fit like why it is the way it is. So this part of the paper I have subtitled as The Failed Romance. The film's protagonist, Nita, is the eldest daughter of a typical Bengali family who, after the partition, has fallen on hard times. She supports the family financially at the cost of her failing health. As her, as her father's health deteriorates, Nita exerts herself physically and emotionally to keep her family solvent. Her older brother, Shankar, is an aspiring singer who does not deem it fit as an emerging artist to get a job, compromising his artistic genius. Her younger brother, Montu, manages to get a job through a sports scholarship but loses it due to an accident. Nita's younger sister, Geeta, is a college student and eventually marries Sanat, who in the film was Nita's lover. Nita's mother is an embittered old woman hardened by poverty who takes life as it comes and cannot fully perform the emotional labor necessary for her children to make the right ethical choices. Ghatak chooses to analogize and allegorize partition through the relationship between Shankar and Nita. By situating a brother sister relationship at the center of a disintegrating family, he comments on the gendered violence that partition has produced. Even though, as refugees, the family experiences the crisis of post partition together, it is Nita's body that has to endure and bear the violence. That Montu and Geeta can afford to continue the studies and Shankar can pursue his artistic aspirations despite the sheer poverty is entirely because Nita's body bears the burden of the crisis. Further, the consummation of Nita's relationship with Sanat also depends on the gradual decay of Nita's body, which throughout the film becomes a fulcrum of restitution project. It is not merely a site where the violence of partition plays out, but a site where the film's narrative seeks for a resolution of the trauma of partition. Now, returning to Meghe Dhaka Tara's subtly revelatory opening sequence, we see clearly on how the film reinforces the significance of Nita and Shankar's relationship, while also pointing to Nita's suffering within this intimate relationship. Indeed, the first two characters that we see in the film are Shankar and Nita, with Nita diminutive against the background of a huge tree slowly approaching towards us. In the next frame, Nita is in the foreground of the shot and Shankar is seen in the background sitting by the banks of a river and practicing his raga. Again, the scene. Uh, in the further background, a train passes by. Okay. The sound of the train passing by fails to drown Shankar's voice and his raga dominates the oral arrangement of the sequence. At this point, Nita looks at Shankar, who's oblivious to her presence, smiles to herself, and leaves a static frame as Shankar continues with his practice. Because there is no exchange of any dialogues at this point, the relationship between the two remains ambiguous. It is only when Nita is reading the letter that her lover, Sanat, writes to her that Shankar shares the frame with her and the brother sister relationship is established. While reading the letter, Nita smiles to herself, and here in the foreground, we see a framed photograph of Shankar and Nita when they were children. Shankar enters her room playfully snatches the letter and reads it aloud while Nita only smiles coyly. Shankar's access to Nita's private life establishes a close relationship between the siblings, which further unravels as the film progresses. However, Nita's reaction when Shankar snatches the letter from her hands is only partly coy. There is also the underlying suggestion that there is no privacy for the individual in the larger space of the colony, where conditions are cramped. Nita laughingly protests that Shankar has transgressed into a woman's personal matter. Shankar also jokingly responds by saying, "Personal? If you are a person, I'm a genius." This jocular remark firmly underlines the irony latent in the film, namely, that the film itself is an extended exploration of the denial of Nita's personhood. Shankar also reads out loudly from the letter, perhaps to embarrass his sister. Nita's lover, Sanat, writes, "The first time I saw you, I thought you are ordinary, but the more I saw you oppressed by circumstances, I feel that you are a cloud-capped star." Meghe Dhaka Tara. Such dialogue demonstrates how the film foregrounds the question of the ordinary woman, like Nita, who are rendered into extraordinary personalities, but who are eventually forgotten in the relentless tide of history and socio-political realities. Cinema is a medium through which the ordinary is rendered into moments of exception. Let us take the example of the everyday act of walking. And we go back now to the scene that I started with, the slipper scene. Nita's slippers tear and her feet come into contact with the hard concrete and the gravel of the street. She is otherwise an ordinary woman in an ordinary sari walking back home. Her beauty, including her long cascading hair and her body, is always camouflaged or downplayed with a conscious decision on her part. When the camera zooms in on the torn slippers, one of the many close ups of the film, the reality of the ordinary or the mundane abstract or the mundane objects strike the viewer as extraordinary. The everyday object and the ordinary woman are renewed with life and imbued with new meaning by the camera. Nita's extraordinary ethical behavior is also a deliberate decision. With her higher education and her hard work and a strong sense of moral obligation, Nita sacrifices both intellectual and sensual pleasures at the altar of a family. There are debts and duties that no one else in her family takes on, prompting us to ask whether it is necessary for her to take on this responsibility at the expense of her body. The only other person in the film who she's shown to have some physical or emotional contact is with her brother Shankar. The person slash genius dichotomy between them runs throughout the course of the film. She works extra hard to absolve her brother of his responsibilities. He has exceptional talent, therefore, the talent and genius needs to be nourished, according to Nita. She accuses him gently of knowing his genius all too well, bordering on arrogance. But her remarks are by no means disapproval. Some of her most redemptive moments come in the scene where she joins him as he is singing. She either listens to him in rapt attention, living the vicarious life of person and a genius, or she joins him in singing Rabindranath Tagore's song that marked the important moments within the narrative structure of the film. Ghatak explores the intimacy of the brother sister relationship in the other two films of the Partition trilogy as well, where the incestuous underpinning of such relationship is quite obvious in films as Subarna Rekha. It is not quite so explicitly suggested in Meghe Dhaka Tara. Nita's relationship with Sanat initially, and Shankar provides the only emotional succor for her self-sacrificing struggle to support a family. However, the conjugality as an end to this romantic couple formation between Nita and Sanat is thwarted when she asks him to wait until their troubles are over. Sanat eventually marries her conniving sister Geeta. The possibility of a romantic union is obviated and then replaced by an excessively intimate bond between the siblings. Unlike the romantic relationship between Sanat and Nita, which is based on opportunism, like Nita supports Sanat as well as uh, from time to time, and superficial love, Shankar and Nita share a deep emotional connection. Constantly reproached by his family and others for not getting a job, Shankar finds solace and support in Nita. The romantic couple is what is replaced by what Moinak Biswas calls pure couple. This emergent couple formation in Ghatak cinema pushes the narrative forward through, though in Meghe Dhaka Tara, it is stripped of any sexual desires. Sexuality is not a luxury that Nita can afford because sensuality implies freedom that she can never aspire to. Shankar, on the other hand, is a victim of displacement and artistic exile so great that he cannot fit into any social template of the new urban center of Kolkata. His only companion and friend is his sister. In this way, he is also shown to be someone who is completely desexualized. By denying Nita of any expression of her sexuality whatsoever, Ghatak comments on a certain form of gendered violence. The multi-layered post-partition era also witnessed the emergence of professional women as women like Nita left the private sectors of their home and ventured out in order to support their families. Violence in its many forms yet again seeps into the everyday lives of these women. In the case of Nita, amongst other physical and emotional violence that she endures, I argue that the impossibility of articulating her sexual desire can also be considered a form of violence. On this, Disha Menon notes that the portrait Ghatak paints of the public women who took on the burden of supporting their families punctures the humanist triumphalism that denies the familial sexual cost that some of these women had to bear. For Ghatak, in a nation that is still reeling under the effects of partition, especially for the refugee families, there is no space for the articulation of romance. Ghatak enunciates this condition through the failure of the romantic couple in Nita and Sanat, and in its place, recalibrates a new relationship that expresses such intimacy through the pure couple form, that is, through Nita and Shankar, the sibling. Like Nita, Shankar also remains without any romantic interest in the film. Moinak Biswa's reading of Meghe Dhaka Tara points to elaborate symbolism within the film that solidifies the argument about the pure couple. Nita was born on the day the goddess Jagadatri, variation of Durga, is worshipped, while Shankar is another name for Shiva, who was Durga's husband. Nita's character alludes to the archetype of the mother goddess Durga as she is nurturing, self sacrifices mother. Moinak Bishwas also notes that in Ghatak films, the brother sister bond forms a relation that resists Oedipal passage by forming a primary basis of love. However, in contrast to Moinak Biswas, I argue that Ghatak's film do not necessarily resist this Oedipal passage. In fact, what it does is that other variations of the mother are mapped into the sister in order to carry the Oedipal element forward. So if we read Nita's character through the mythic illusions of a mother goddess, her intimate relation with Shankar can be understood through this Oedipal configuration as well. Just as he treats the themes of partition in the film as subtextual ones, the couple form is also explored in the layers of meaning that he assigns to the narrative and the visual arrangement of the film. As Biswas point out, the relationship between Sanat and Nita is something that Nita participates in without much hesitation. However, on the other hand, her relationship with Shankar is based on sharing and coping with the violence of partition. This condition is temporarily overcome by the siblings with their occasional indulgence in playful frivolity, unconditional love, and understanding, along with the exchange of poems and songs of Tagore. Ghatak also reinforces this configuration of the couple by drawing certain similarities between Sanat and Shankar. Both Sanat and Shankar depend on Nita for economic support from time to time. Where Shankar aspires to be a singer, Sanat aspires to complete his higher education and get a job. The male character can afford to have ambitions and dreams, unlike the female characters, especially Nita, whose dreams and hopes are external to her. She pins her hopes on both these men in her life. It is interesting to note that even though Sanat is a familiar figure for Nita's family, Sanat and Shankar never actually meet throughout the film. What we see is that both are referred to there in their conversations with Nita. But Ghatak places a greater value on the brother-sister relationship, even in his visual composition of sequences that develop the Nita and that develop this relation. For example, in the sequence involving Shankar snatching Sanat's love letter, it is not just the physical presence of the brother that disrupts the realization of their romantic couple, that is through the letter, but also because before Shankar enters the room, the focus of the frame photograph of the siblings deflects the romantic balance of the moment. And I will just pull up that picture in a moment. Um, yeah, in another sequence, when Sanat and Nita are acting out courtship rituals, Shankar's present and importance in her life is referred to in their conversation. Neeta and Sanat are sitting by the banks of the river, and the supposed romantic conversation is about the financial constraints in the life. At this point, the camera moves into both of them, and the conversation takes place against the unspectacular background of the river. But then the camera cuts to Nita's face from the opposite angle and shows us a particular background of the sunset. The romantic imagery of the sunset is infused with wistful conversations about Shankar. Nita mentions that the frame photograph in her room, which I'll just pull it up so that I have a reference. Just a second. Mm, yeah, so this is the, okay, I have to move a bit, but basically, she holds a photograph here of Shankar and herself when they were kids. And okay, so she explains to Sanat that she and her brother went to the hills when they were kids. She says that despite the pain of climbing the hills at dawn to catch the sight of the sunrise, the thrill of it was indescribable. She mentions that Shankar still teases her with Cookie wants to catch the moon. The way Nita narrates the story with nostalgic yearning against the background of the setting sun complicates the notion of romance. Romance for Nita derives its value in her yearning for the childhood with her brother. Arguably, her idea of romance has to do with the thrill she experienced with her brother. Nita's constant dwelling and romancing the past consolidates her figure as a pre-partition subject that is struggling to negotiate with the new identity of the citizen subject of partition India. And so, childhood memories and her relationship with her brother are the only happiness that she returns to repeatedly, as the notion of romance is also contiguous with these memories. The only desire that she expresses is the one to go back to these hills with her brother, which is fulfilled later in her dying days. When Shankar takes her to Shankar takes her to a sanatorium in the hills in Shillong. Sexual desire is substituted with nostalgic yearning for the past, and thus Shankar replaces Sanat in the film's primary romantic configuration. Ghatak employs the melodramatic devices of repetition and cyclicity of movements in the film to deliver its significance in the narrative. So, therefore, the imagery of the hills is refrained throughout the film in a photograph. Just like the frame photograph, Nita and Shankar are too trapped in this imagery of the past. The photograph articulates their love, and so it is the only object that Nita chooses to take when she is asked to leave the house due to her disease. It stands for the only semblance of love that she had experienced and cherished. It is in her death that the narrative seeks to find a resolution, a closure to the brother sister couple form. The film does not end, however, with her death, only her implied death. As she is diagnosed with tuberculosis in an advanced stage, it is her brother Shankar who arranges for her treatment at a sanatorium up in the mountains. He promises her, as she retreats into a state of helpless delirium and relapses into memories of her childhood, that she will finally see the mountains. She laughs after her diagnosis, her first full-throated laughter in the entirety of the film. The imminence of death gives us a freedom that life did not afford her. In the penultimate sequence of the film, Shankar goes to visit her in the sanatorium. Her condition is serious and the nurse advises him not to upset her. She sits alone in a cliff, reading the love letter from Sanat that had declared her as a cloud-capped star. She had held on to it for a long time, and her overwhelming exile is apparent when Shankar sits next to her. He informs her that Sanat and Geeta have a child now, and that their house is finally two-storied. Everyone is established and the family is finally prosperous. This is what Shankar tells Nita. Nita, who is quiet and restrained in the rest of the film, screams for the first time over and over again, Dada, I wanted to live. The only person who gave her some connection to life, Shankar, the brother, displaced paramour, has to leave. As he goes back to the colony, he is clean shaved and very different from the first part of the film. Their old shopkeepers asked him how Nita is doing and remarked that she was so quiet and returned home every day, her slippers making a thumping sound as it trampled the gravel. as he says that Shankar's eyes dart towards a woman who is dressed like Nita and was walking the same path. Her feet falter and her slippers tear on the stone chips in a similar way that happened in the introductory scene. One is reminded of the opening frames of the film. Shankar's eyes well up and he covers his face with his palms. It is clear that the film establishes that Nita's story is not exceptional. The invisible labor, emotional, physical, done by women in post partition India is constant and unacknowledged. Their lives have been disposable and their absence unnoticed except for by those who perhaps loved them greatly, such as Shankar, but who still cannot take the burden of the labor. The torn slippers are symbolic of the narrative push beyond the lens of the camera and cinema into real life. With this, I uh, conclude my presentation. But then again, while reading, and this might be very tangential, but something came into my mind while I was talking about this brother-sister relationship, especially the sibling bonds that go through great trauma. And yes, I do hint in this paper a certain kind of a calibration of what an incestuous relationship would be, which is due to trauma. But I was remembered Arundhati Roy's God of Small Things, where if all of us have read it, I'm sure it is the twins, the brother sisters who end up having sex as a kind of resolution to the trauma that they have endured during their childhood. So I think there is something to say about this kind of a recalibration of what incestuous relationship means between a sibling duo in case of trauma, like in case of partition here for Ritwik Ghatak. So with that, I end my presentation, and I would be happy to hear your comments, feedbacks, and other analysis if you want to share.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And now, one by one, if anyone has any perspective to share or any comment they want to make about what ma'am has presented or any question they want to ask, they can continue.
Can I come in, Shiuli?
Definitely, ma'am.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jenisha, for that close reading of the film. I thought I also found the characterization of the mother very interesting because generally in cinema, especially Indian cinema, mothers are, kind of idealized, romanticized as sacrificial and all of that. But here it is the mother who it's of course shown in very subtle ways. She is exploitative of the daughter who happens to be the sole earning member of that displaced family. So that I and also the way she manipulates the relationship with Sanat and makes sure that it is not Neeta but the younger sister Geeta who marries him, because again, like if Neeta leaves the house, then it's the loss of a regular income. So I thought that characterization was very interesting and something that broke the mold of this mother figure in films. Thank you.
No, that's absolutely correct, Geeta. I have noticed this, and something has to be said. I think with how I so see, yes, this is again. I'm talking about a lot of how these feminist tropes are used in through Nita. But there is again another character, as you mentioned, the mother, who is also a partition subject. But I feel like with the mother, there is a certain kind of a generation. For instance, Nita belonged to a generation that actually uh, like this was probably when she was probably 20s 30s when partition of Bengal happened, right? So that trauma had a different kind of effect on her life as opposed to her mother, which probably had gone through another era of trauma, which does not translate into Nita's. And it was also interesting that yes, but it flips the whole idea of what a character like a mother does in Indian cinema. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, in Napu trilogy also there is a one character, the mother character, who's actually not very kind and also very, rough around the edges. So I'm not exactly sure what to make of this, the older mother character that is not exactly favorably looked upon by, let's say, Ray or Ghatak in certain films. But also, the role of the mother in this case is not this figurative mother, which is Nita's mother. It's actually Nita being the mother, right? So that role of mother is completely mapped into Nita's body. So again, whether you can say it in terms of like the unassailable tragedy of self-sacrifice or whatever, or you can also lean into argue with Moinak Biswas when he says that, Oedipal complex have been thwarted by the brother-sister relationship, but it has not been thwarted. The mother has been mapped onto the sister. So the role of mother in this kind of blurs the line between who exactly is the ideal mother in a situation like this. But yeah, that labor of a mother has been mapped into Nita's character.
One thing I noticed, I would like to share that I feel that here Nita is the personification of Bengal itself, and the family is the nation, India. So it is mostly like Bengal tearing itself off to favor the nation.
Can you repeat that, Shelly? What was the nation?
Madhuri, can you please mute yourself? Krishna Priya, can you please mute Madhuri? Yes, ma'am, was I not audible?
It was not very clear. Yeah, can you repeat that if you don't mind?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I felt that Nita is the personification of Bengal itself, and while the household is the personification of the whole nation, that is India. And here the Bengal is tearing itself up and facing the problems mentally and physically to favor the household or the nation, that is India.
Yeah, I mean, yes, that is completely true. But that is what exactly I was trying to say, that the whole burden of trauma, not the whole basically, but a different kind of a burden of the trauma of partition is mapped into the Nita's body so that the nation, as you say, or the family, as you say, can prosper, which is why Nita has to die in the end. And, Sanat and her sister then has a kid and lives a prosperous life. So it was the kind of a resolution of that trauma that Nita had to go through this death in as a kind of a soft cushioning for the other people in the film to realize their pain.
Others can come out with their questions or comments. Nikhila ma'am, do you want to ask anything?
Can I come in?
Definitely.
Okay. So I have been hearing about Ritwik's films and as an analysis for maybe 3 decades or 4 decades. I never heard something which you have mentioned, the sexual overtone of the brother and the sister, which is totally, I don't know, I'm a little confused because if you look at the body of work of Ritwik, the way he handles sexuality is between brothers, or even in Subarna Rekha between the adopted brother, all of it is, I think, very subtle. I think, I don't know whether you are reading too much to it, but you people from Bengal, you can read these things, subtle nuances better than me. But on the whole, I felt most of Ritwik's characters, they are suffering from separate, from their situation, which they've been put suddenly uprooted and put there, and they have to face it on their own. And of course, that's and 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 it is raw life which he plays around with for us to see and experience it. Unlike many filmmakers who takes a distant view of things, he gets into the characters, into the situations. So I don't know where this sexual overtone comes in, because it's the whole story is burdened with sufferings and interpersonal relationship, which is because of the situation of the family. Um, I don't know. You can explain it better. That
Yeah, I mean, yes, I did not mention sexual overtone nowhere in my paper. I said that this uh, recalibration of a pure couple, as Moinak Biswas mentions this in his analysis of what a pure couple is in Meghe Dhaka Tara, which is again, he mentions the same relation. So what I'm trying to say is that this pure couple form has no sexual overtone at all, but it's still a certain kind of a romantic, incestuous, emotional attachment. And I have very clearly throughout my reading said that she has been disenfranchised of any kind of sexual desire or even sensuality, right? So this couple form that I am actually hinting at in in this analysis is actually a recalibration of what a incestuous brother sister relationship is in any other literature, but also something that which is devoid of any kind of sexual attachment, but is something which is so close that even Sanat, her lover, cannot penetrate this bond. So this is what I mean by, and obviously following from Biswas, this is what I mean by the pure couple. It is not referring to any kind of sexual intertone, overtones, or uh, undercurrents.
Yeah, I don't know. My point is that by doing that, are you not taking out uh, the filmmaker's intent of the suffering which they all undergo, the brother, the sisters, the brothers, and the family. That's my point.
Okay, I understand, but like I just want to understand a little bit more. What exactly do you mean by how do I take the suffering away from
Yeah,
this?
because we are putting it in a totally different perspective altogether. Because I don't think it's like saying, people say about the Professor Sadish Bagadur, when he analyzes Father Panchali and the Aput trilogy, even Ray, I'm told, is quoted somewhere saying that, look, I never intended so many things in my film, but Professor Bahadur finds all these
Yeah,
things,
but that is
you
again the
know,
kind, yes, I totally understand that,
yeah.
but that is the kind of a hazard that we as analysts will have to bear, right? Like if Ghatak is not there to, let's say, explain a scene, and it has been, by the way, this is not just my analysis. It has been actually written a lot, especially this scene. And not even by someone like Moinak Biswas, whose entire over has to do with people like Ghatak and Ray. So it's not that something that I am saying something new. Yes, I am saying something that is probably not well popularized in terms of an idea of a reading of this film, because this film has been read in so many ways. And you obviously, I can't even go to the depths of how many ways this film can be analyzed. But again, we fall into the hazards of being cinema scholars reading into image. And if I am reading into image, I am not, again, associating this very clearly with a certain kind of a sexual undertone that takes away their franchise of expressing their trauma. This is not what I'm doing. I'm saying precisely that there are certain things need to be said between a sibling relationship that goes deeper than any kind of, let's say, the post-independence idea of what a heteronormative romantic couple is. This is what I'm saying. In that way, they fracture they fracture not only the narrative of what a couple should be in a post-independence India, but also they all, it's again a pure couple. It has nothing to do with sex. And again, couple, we should not be so, I think, limited to the idea of understanding couple as only heteronormative, romantic kind of coalitions, again. So in its form, couple can be any two people. So in its meaning, right? So if I am saying that they are the pure couple, for borrowing from Moinak Biswas, not my words, I am saying that this is the pure couple form that Ghatak imagines for Nita to have a certain kind of closure in her life, because she did not have Sanat to give this closure. And this is what I exactly mean by. And I mean, yes, again, in another reading, probably I am taking away certain kind of agency, but then,
Totally understandable. Brother, I'm a man without a sister, so I can't comment deeply on it. But the fact that you mentioned about Arundhati Roy's, novel and incest, that's what disturbed me.
Yeah,
That's
no, that
okay.
was a kind, no, sir, I do understand where you're coming from, but that was a kind of an afterthought, which is why I added that as a footnote to my presentation. It's not a part of the presentation. That was a footnote to me thinking more about, because I have come across certain examples of how brother-sister relationship gets into this territory when there is a background of trauma experience. And that is what the only similarity that I was bringing in terms of referring to Arundhati Roy as a footnote.
Yeah, can I ask a question?
Is this Madhavi?
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
yes. Hi, Madhavi.
Just a second. Yeah. Jenisha, really, you analyzed the movie in detail, actually. When I was watching this movie, I never thought that, I can see the movie in that way, actually. Thanks for that. And this thing is, see, in Ritwik Ghatak's, this Nita's character, is frequently read as a symbol of, self-sacrificing womanhood. But in today's context, if you see, how do we read this gendered portrayal? Is Ghatak merely reflecting patriarchal norms, or is he offering a deeper critique of, how women's labor, both emotional and economic, is individualized during the times of socio-political upheaval? I just, like to have your reflections on this.
I think, yeah, I mean, on the first day of this whole Ghatak Centenary discussion that we started when Sangeeta was presenting, and she did a brilliant job of giving a background of, Ghatak as an activist or in IPTA and all. So I'm not getting into all of that. I just base my thing on the analysis. And coming to that, I do think that Ghatak, and sorry, I refer to the first session because there was a question, I don't remember by whom. At the end of the session, someone asked a question: was Ghatak a feminist filmmaker or something to that extent? Like, what about the women in Ghatak's films? I think something to that extent the question was asked, and I think this answer is very much apparent when we look at this film, that this is what Ghatak had to not show, but actually, because what he showed is what he felt. So I think this is what Ghatak felt in terms of how women, especially as a post-partition subject, doubly post-partition subject in Kolkata, was actually dealing with not just an urban woman who's, coming out to the city and taking up jobs. Yes, it is there, but underneath it, it was also a big gash of trauma that she is carrying within in order to uplift her family. So I think it is a kind of not just a critique, but there's a certain kind of, I feel like it's not a critique, but a certain kind of dwelling upon on the situation at that point of time as witnessed by Ghatak, I think.
Thank you. Thank you.
Shiuli, if I can come in.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So thanks, Jenisha, for that close reading, and it also kind of helped me to bring together certain ideas that I was and a certain sense of. I mean, I wanted to see some kind of a pattern over the 3 weeks. And in some ways, your presentation helped to push my understanding in that direction. And that is about the recurrence of the figure whom you can call the castrated male figure in Ghatak's films. There is such a great deal of anxiety among in all the films.
Yeah.
Men who are not working, men who are, whose masculinity is at a great
Yeah.
threat because they don't seem to be doing what is productive within
Yeah.
quotes for men to do. This sense of dependence that is kind of they have to depend on the woman, but at the same time not value her, so and she is someone who is in that sense devalued, even as her labor is exploited, and so on. So particularly this figure of this emasculated man, and this moral and ethical, the center of moral and ethical value in the film is certainly the woman, whether it's
Nita. Yeah.
Nita here, or even in the other films that
Yeah.
we watched. So it seems like Ghatak is moving, I mean, is probing that particular aspect. And also, I'm not sure, Jenisha, if you would like to go there, but this particular, lack of value to the laboring woman is also, I feel, something that is peculiar to the caste, which is not mentioned anywhere in the film, but is probably upper caste. And the trauma comes because I think, and this is again my reading, people, friends like Cherian may not agree. Part of the trauma is also because this upper caste woman who is supposed to be shielded in the Bhadralok, in the sphere of the home, is now in public and is, so there is this threat that there is this threat of the loss of caste because this woman has transgressed boundaries.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I feel all these anxieties. I don't know whether Ghatak intended, but these are the anxieties that I can see in the film. The sense that, where is it coming from? What is so horrific about a woman who is supporting her family that, as you said, she has to be kind of killed off in the end? So I feel all these are coming from a different place, the place of anxiety about caste, the family losing caste, because this woman is doing what she is doing, and therefore the need to eject her from the family. I think all these are what are so evident in Ghatak's films. I mean, this is my reading. And I'm so glad that we are not doing a kind of just a formalist. I mean, he's a great filmmaker, and I think all the discussion in the group and everyone who has written has endorsed that. But I think it is also important for us to read what Ghatak may not have intended, to read what we now can see looking back and placing him and his films in a particular context. Thanks, Jenisha.
No, thank you, Nikhila, for that. And again, just to reiterate that as lovers of cinema, where we find meanings and different sections of the film, I, there is a kind of a risk that all of us run in terms of reading against what the intent is, right? Like, so let's say even like Night of the Living Dead, which came out in 1960, the director very clearly said that I had no intention of raising a certain kind of a class or a race war with this film. He just chose a black actor for the film. But what it did, that casting of a black actor in a 1960s indie film did change the whole way we look at film, right? So in the same way, like, we are all part of this kind of a risk burden, or even a kind of let's say a positive thing as well, to be able to read films as opposed to what it is intended. Now, coming back to what you were saying, yes, Nicola, I do completely agree that there is a certain kind of, yes, erasure of Nita as a person, as a personhood. And yes, and I also agree that, like, I obviously people from Bengal will be able to more able to confirm this, but it does seem like it is an upper caste family, because in the opening sequences the father is talking in English. He has a colonial hangover. He reads out Yeats. He reads out other English poets, and again there is a memory of what their old home or the old house used to look like, right? So this is also, again, yes, of course, it's about erasure. It's also about the emotional labor and all of that, but also it's about, like, a erasure of an identity, a caste identity, which is upper caste identity. And that, of course, is a very valid anxiety if you are from upper caste, and something that can be very validly read against that. I completely take that, Nikhila.
Shuli, may I come in?
Definitely you can.
Nandini, so since there's been quite some talk about Bengali speaking, let me speak as a Bengali. And also a Bengali who is related to Ghatak, and also a Bengali whose, whose family lore has included these kinds of stories. I just want to say that, thanks, Jenisha, and I think you've made a very valid point, a sort of epistemological point, that it is, it's within the the expertise of the analyst to actually read perhaps even beyond what the filmmaker possibly intended, because we're just in the realm of in some sense in the realm of speculation. But it is also but it's also definitely coming from deep reading. So it's so not to think. I was also a little taken aback by your Arundhati Roy thing, since I am from the family.
No, I know.
No, that's okay. That's fine. No, but that's fine. I don't want to speak about that. What I do want to say is that we are talking about a filmmaker who has actually not written the script. It is based on Shaktipada Rajguru's novel, and he was an extremely fairly prolific, and he was very, very popular. And a lot of his stories were made into commercially successful films. This particular film, Meghe Dhaka Tara, was a commercially successful film, unlike many of Ghatak's films. I think one should remember sort of that. That's one thing I think that is important, because I don't know, I haven't read the original, so I don't know if anyone, Shuli or anyone else here, has read the original story and where Ghatak takes, I don't know whether how much he deviates from it. But I do want to say one thing, which is, this is not to take away from the, again, respecting the fact that respecting that readings of these kinds of cinematic texts are completely valid, and they will change over time, and there'll be different kinds of perspectives. I do want to say just two things. One is that this film, in my view, and I think there are others also who agree. It's one of Ghatak's actually, although it's very celebrated, it's a bit different from all his films because it's extremely melodramatic.
Yeah.
And I mean, that melodramatic element in this film can be actually, it's what brings tears all the time. I've seen it many times, and of course, many of us see it and weep. I mean, at least at least I know many people who have. But it's that extreme sort of almost, that eviscerating melodrama that this perhaps the story and certainly the film has. And I always remember, apart from the last bit, which, by the way, this discussion of what is said and the tense, actually she is saying ami bach bo, which means she's expressing the need, she's expressing that she will live, that she's making a claim on life.
Okay.
So I think that it's not bachte chai, or it's been translated like that, but it does actually connote that. So I mean, I think there's not, at least my limited Bengali would suggest that.
No, my Bengali is much more limited, so I take it.
No, mine is not that great. I mean, I'll leave it to but I think that's why that line comes back again and again as Ami Bajte Chai. But I've lost my train of thought, but I can't recall now what I was going to say. Yeah, so one thing is it's extremely melodramatic, unlike his other films. And although he did see these three films together, the other two, which we're not seeing, I think, Komal Kandar and Shubhanu Rekha, are very different in character from this one. Definitely. So I think, and the melodrama, actually, this thing about getting the woman character. I mean, Ghatak relied, and I think Sangeeta had talked about it, but it's something that's quite interesting that I used to also find very interesting. How much he was also fluent in Sanskrit. So, I mean, he had a tremendous hold over other kinds of Sanskritic texts and so on. It's quite interesting. So he actually did that, and you see the recurrent use of mythological motifs also in his films. You see, for example, for somebody who, I mean, I don't want to again oversimplify this, but for somebody who was a materialist, was a Marxist, he uses Tagore. He's also spoken about how he, for him, Tagore was really a lens to look at life. And now these are things which I think are interesting, and maybe from people who are a bit more familiar, maybe these little nuances are important. I think finally, I just want to say, I mean, I'm not saying very much, but I just want to say in the end that, the trauma of partition is really something that I think just one has to keep foregrounding in this, in seeing the film. I mean, the fact that Neeta is the elder, I mean, she's the older daughter. She's coming from a generation which is educated, and they were thrown into this situation. She would possibly have, I mean, also worked if India hadn't, I mean, if the subcontinent hadn't got partitioned. I don't think this question of, being secluded within the home, and because she's upper caste, I don't really, I mean, it doesn't sit very well with me, but I haven't thought too much about it, but I'm just going by the little I know. But it is that trauma. And I think Meghe Dhaka Tara is particularly sort of, it really pulls at one's sense of that trauma, because through that heightened melodrama, I mean, her going up those steps of that hospital and the whiplash, I mean, that is, at one point it's so incredibly sad, but then on one hand, it's like, what is going on here, Do you have to rub it in like this? I mean, so it's so melodramatic, and it's very unlike his other films. So I just want to say that much, and I'll stop. I mean, I don't.
No, thank you, Nandini, for those comments and your views on the film, because I totally share that, and which is why I started like my obsession with the slipper scene with the anecdote from my mother. Like, no other film she would describe, or any other scene that she has described up till now. It's only this scene that she has described.
Yes, that has really stayed with a lot of people of an earlier generation, the slipper.
Yeah, exactly. So it's
absolutely
so melodramatic.
Thank you for bringing that in. Yeah, that absolutely.
Yeah, like, so, and it repeats again, like, in order to make its meaning much more robust, it repeats again in the
It
last
starts
sequence.
again. I mean, the
Yeah,
story starts
yeah,
again.
exactly, through another woman, right? So,
Yeah.
and Shankar identifies it. He's the only one who identifies what
Yeah.
exactly does this mean. And yes, it's so melodramatic, like even in the last sequence when you corrected as said that, what does she say? I will leave, right? Not Ami Bashte.
No,
uh,
she's Ami Bachbo.
yeah, so I will leave. So in that scene, there is a kind of a camera movement which is very bizarre. Like if you've noticed, the camera actually goes there is no hold on the camera. It just goes around the hills. You just hear her shout, and the camera just does a whole 360-degree
Yeah.
turn.
Yeah.
And it's so bizarre, but at the same time, it's so emphatically cathartic, because it's the end. And then again, when she's saying that, like, this is finally the hill where I have found, not the same hill, but she has always loved the mountains, she has loved being with a brother. And again, and she says in a hope that she will live. So yes, it is a very, very melodramatic treatment of the story that Ghatak had employed, from different from any other story. I completely agree with the melodramatic part. Now, second thing that I was thinking about, which was, I think you mentioned something about. I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. Will you repeat that, Nandini? What was the second point that you mentioned?
I was just saying a lot of things, so I don't I don't remember what I was
I
saying.
think it's
But
probably about that Nita would have worked even if the partition would have happened.
yes, yes.
Yes.
No, she's the first generation. See, that's that generation of
Yeah.
women who did, I mean, they were my mother's contemporaries. They were definitely from the Bhadralok.
Hmm.
They came from Bhadralok castes, I mean, upper caste, but they're the first to have been educated, and would have probably worked anyway. I mean, but the partition forced that, and the fact that she was the older daughter, and
Yes.
this
Yes.
older daughter syndrome is also an interesting
Yeah.
kind of trope in this, isn't it?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
definitely. I also would like to, it's very interesting that, like, the reason I generally don't read films that closely. I used to do it, but now I have a different technique. But this film needs very close analysis, because this film is entirely about partition, yet there is no mention of partition. Like, throughout the film, you would not hear the word partition or like this happened. It's only by traces of what happened in the scenes, like, let's say, the refugee colony. If you see her breaking her slipper, her living condition, that's when you know that he's referring to a certain period of time that he has had certain experience with in terms of trauma. So I feel, and this is coming from experience. I remember watching this film in my class in Chicago, and there were a lot of other, non-Indian students, mostly from Europe and Western. So for people who did not understand that this film was about partition, we were not given an introduction. We were just, so people who did not know that this film is about partition, because they did not mention it anywhere in the film that this is about partition, it again uh, conjured up a different kind of image of trauma, right? So, and when then that was explained, that is when we started, like, looking at, yes, this film needs to be studied in terms of this kind of uh, over analysis to understand what Ghatak is actually trying to say, because he's running the whole narrative on subtextual grounds.
Even the river actually
Yeah,
connotes that, right?
or even the
The
train
river very
passing.
much connotes that, because the
Yeah,
others, it's this opar epar thing, so it's this other side of the river.
yeah,
Yeah, but it's not explicit. And the father's like madness.
yeah,
If you have to
exactly.
read, you have, yeah, it's not mentioned. That's
So,
true.
which is why I love this film, because it actually does not give the Westerners any kind of clue to what is the colloquial trauma that we are facing, because obviously you wouldn't understand it. So, in that way, I feel that this film is so very, how should I say, it's very local, not unlike Ray. Like Ray is very global. You can understand through a certain kind of cinematic language. But Ghatak upturns every of this kind of trope or methods in order to push his subtext, which is generally very easily understandable to people that he's actually relating to in the film.
Can I go on with my question?
Sure.
Thank you so much, Jenisha ma'am, for joining us over this fruitful discussion on Meghe Dhaka Tara, directed by Dr. Ritwik Ghatak. So this is also my first time watching the director's movies, and I have already watched a couple of them, and I must admit that this film has been the most heartfelt movie I've watched so far. And I do attribute this affinity from my side to this movie, given my femininity and given my state as a female. So to see the movie from the perspective of the sister who is the breadwinner of the family. So that was indeed a lot pleasant to see the female being portrayed as the one winning winning the family food. But then what also captivated me during your discussion on the film gradually was that the movie went on to show eventually the downfall of this sister who was diagnosed with tuberculosis, and then in a way this ends up in the tragedy of the sister. So we do see the female being shown as the person who is daring enough, even if there's so much modesty in the sister who is not daring to do something. Who there's a sacrificial side from the sister constantly, that the sister has given up. The sister has let go of their personal studies, so the brother can learn how to sing. The sister can do what the sister wants. But then, in a way, the family entirely. Also, the moments wherein the father comes in during one night to say that they have been the one protecting the family, but then they will have to. Their breath is poisonous, and now that they have to leave the family. So this kind of depicted to me what I will call nullification of the feminism that I found and then I lost in some kind of way. So I would like your reflection on that angle. And secondly, I will also ask you to let me know if you have anything to say, anything to reflect on the sisterhood that we see in between the elder sister and the younger sister, through the kind of connection that is the mother. We see that the younger sister being married to the supposed lover of the elder sister. There is so much caprice in the lover. We see that the lover is into the elder sister, but then when the elder sister is not around, they tend to be drawn into the young sister. So that's something I would like to know, since you've talked about trauma in between siblings, incestuous relationships between siblings. So how will you reflect on this kind of complexity in between siblings of the same type? So I like that.
I will actually answer the second question first, and then I'll try to not answer because like we are all discussing. But to your second question, I think Nandini already pointed out that there is something to say about the first daughter of a partition subject family which has gone through trauma, which frankly, I don't have much information on why the elder daughter takes on the role of what in that period of time, what a son should take the role of. I'm not exactly sure what it does in terms of like, let's say, why does this happen, like, or why is it showing that, like. But also I think we should also think about, like, let's say this is about sacrifice. So I understand where you come from in terms of your nullification of feminism idea that you have mentioned, I also completely agree that yes, when you watch the film, you see that this is the brave person, taking all the self-sacrificial roles. But also we also have to sometimes stop and think that you know uh, feminist fights, feminist battles are not always the outrageous ones which you come out in the street and fight against authorities. It's the silent battle that Indian women every day goes through. So for a lot of, I would say, the ability, and this is the ground reality. I'm not giving a certain kind of my opinion, but a lot of Indian women, whether it be in the past or even now, endure the battles much more silently than obviously their counterparts male does, right? Things have become a little different now, but I would not at that point reduce their silence or refuse to fight the authorities as a certain kind of disavowalment with the feminist ideals. I would actually say that staying within the structure of what they were expected to be able to, bear the burden of, in this case, the partition trauma, or even in other cases of, let's say, any other issues right now, it is the silent, how would I say, uh, you basically become a much more the sacrificial figure is not necessarily an anti-feminist figure for me, which is what I'm trying to say. Because again, you will see this in Ghatak does it in much more how should I say, in a myopic way. But let's say if we look at Japanese cinema, Mizoguchi is known as one of the most feminist filmmaker whose entire over was about films that women go through tragedy that they don't overcome. These are unassailable tragedies, but yet there is a certain strength in being able to endure this given the times that they were living in. And that, I would say, is not exactly a disavowalment of feminism, but actually reiterates it in a different way that can be written in within our historical context.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your fruitful reflection. Thank you.
Others, you can come with your comments and questions, obviously. Now. Sridhar sir, Tarkeshwar sir, you can say something if you want to.
Okay, thank you very much. Only if you're trying to place the text in the context, uh, you will be able to understand it as a partition narrative. As you said, not only the Westerners, even a person like me from South India,
Yeah,
we have no idea of
exactly.
partition in the sense the Bengal or Punjab
Yes,
underwent it.
yes. So with yes,
I would, in my reading of the text, I would completely discount partition. And let me see what comes out of it for
yeah,
me. If I
yeah.
discount the partition,
Hmm.
so the trauma is, it is not that the jobs are not available. The jobs are available. And he wants to do PhD rather than joining a job.
Hmm.
There are suggestions to that fellow, Sarath, I think. But he
Sanat,
doesn't want to join.
yeah.
And even for somebody who drops out of MA, there are jobs available. But completing MA is more important. And in fact, our father disapproves of the younger son when he joins a factory.
Yeah,
So the jobs are available. It is not that there is a big unemployment issue out there. But what kind of chakri, that is the word that comes up, that is more important. So it's a kind of a nostalgia for the kind of job that they were used to earlier, whatever it could be. And then that nostalgia is something that pervades the entire thing.
yeah,
And then this loss of privileges
yeah,
that they had is something that constantly things. In the earlier films, there was some kind of a kind of tour of the surrounding places,
Hmm.
where there was a kind of interaction with the other communities, classes, and there some kind of interaction with them, some kind of bonding was there. Here, completely that is absent in this particular text.
Hmm.
I am not interested whether it is whether I should attribute my reading of this text to either Ritwik Ghatak or to the uh, story writer. That is immaterial to me.
Hmm.
So I'm simply reading the text, as you said. When it came to the relationship between the brother and sister,
Hmm.
it's your reading or somebody else reading, and what they bring to uh, read and make sense of the
Yes.
visuals that and the oral stimuli that they're encountering. And then the figure of poor Brahmin is something that is often invoked here. Though you said the caste is not mentioned, but there is a sequence where there is Satyanarayana Puja which is going on.
Hmm.
And there is a story that is being narrated. And it starts with a poor Brahmin was there in Mathura. And only that line is prominent in that story because the narrative moves away from it quickly uh, from that puja itself. So, in that sense, this figure of the poor Brahmin, what it does in this text and what it does in other texts that I have encountered is something that is worth investigating. I think this premium on partition is maybe it is valid if you're trying to place the text in the context of its production. But the text also performs certain effect outside the context of its production too.
Yes, completely. Yeah.
So how do we read whether we should read the text in the context of its production or in the context of its consumption? I think it's an interesting issue to look at, and depending on what stand we take on how do we read and attribute meanings to the visual and the oral stimuli that we get when we watch something, is an interesting question, and the debate is around it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tarakeshwar. I agree with most of the points that you mentioned, that the film gives a different kind of a reading nonetheless if you decontextualize it from the partition event. And yet it still has so much to offer, even if you decontextualize it, whether you read it from the, again, as you mentioned, through the trope of this archetype character like Nita, or through the brother. Right, so there were jobs again, like, but why exactly this woman has to be the self-sacrificial, embodiment of what, let's say, I wouldn't say partition trauma, but again, in this context, because you mentioned it, you read it without that. But what does it say about this moment where, uh, Shankar, on one hand, can take a job. He is elder, but he says that if you are a person, I'm a genius, and he chooses to pursue his artistic skills. And she, on the other hand, steps in to become the kind of the provider for the entire family, not just Shankar. So yes, there is many, many layers to this that we can read it even without the context of partition trauma. And that is something that I think is very much uh, well done by the uh, deployment of the melodramatic tropes that he has scattered around in the film. And that is why I think people who do not even understand or have a hint of the partition trauma still relate to it, and in different ways as they make sense of what it is.
Sridhar sir, Madhurima, David, anyone would like to speak something?
No. I have nothing to add.
Okay. Madhurima, Vairav, Ruvaya, anyone? Krishna Priya is also there. Okay, so I don't think anyone has any more question at all. Anything that anyone would like to share or comment on?
Yeah, let me come in, because Ritwik is a favorite filmmaker of mine, so I can speak on anything about Ritwik. Today in the lunch, I had a lunch with a senior Bengali gentleman and writer. We were talking about Ritwik's films, and in Meghe Dhaka Tara, we were generally discussing, and of course, he happened to be son-in-law of Chidamda Das Gupta. So we generally discussing the fact that Ritwik, the difference between Ritwik and the other Ray and Mrinal Sen. And as was pointed out, that the way Ritwik uses partition, the trauma of partition, and also the imagery, the local religious imagery, a lot of it, and though he's a diehard leftist or communist cardholder, the way he uses this, that is, I was telling my friend that is very, very interesting aspect of that filmmaker, because he's trying to communicate to the large audience who may not subscribe to his social and political philosophies, but he's trying to get to them through all means, all imageries possible. And as far as the question of partition or displacement, I had this theory that across India there are people who have, after the partition and all of this thing, even today, people migrate from one state to other, one country to other. And in Kerala, the state where maximum migration happens to, other countries, there's so many stories have come up of sufferings, so I I was comparing these two. If you see the film Got Life, it's also about the trauma of displacement. So I think I will agree with Tarageshwarji when he says that it has to be seen as philosophically, not just physically, because it's an ongoing process of development. People get displaced, and they have trauma in the process. Now, I'm deliberately taking the example of Got Life. If anybody has seen that film, Malayalam film, it's an OTT. You can see that the whole suffering is because of displacement, and he's been transported, and he's displaced because of the not just political reason; it's because of the economic reasons. Okay.
Anyone else? Madhurima, you can unmute and ask the question yourself.
Yeah, I'm reading the.
Yeah, I don't really have a question since many of you have mentioned as this Brahmin aspect and whether the family is a Brahmin or not, it is not clear. So I just wanted to mention that it is written in Bengali script in the film that in one of the scenes when the postman is delivering the letter that his brother is injured from the factory, some instrument. Yeah. So there it was written Shri Tarini Chakraborty, MA. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you, Madhurima. Yeah, I didn't catch that. So thanks for enlightening me about this.
I think it was very good decoding.
Yeah.
And thank you for the discussion. It was a well-led discussion.
Thank you.
Okay, so if anyone doesn't have anything more to say, I think we can conclude today's session. Jenisha ma'am, would you like to say anything to conclude it?
Are you asking me?
Yes, ma'am.
Again, I don't have anything to conclude on Ghatak, who can be again read in so many different ways. But then I think something that I deal with every film that I like or relate to is the question that I ask myself is whether I want to understand the film or whether I want to experience the film. And not saying that these two are very, uh, uh, different categories. It can overlap at the same time. But then again, with Ghatak, for a lot of people who understand the tropes and the symbols, it is understanding the whole situation, the context of what happened. But then again, for people like, as Tarakwisher mentioned, like, who did not get the, or for even my friends who did not understand the subtext of the partition trauma, it can again be an experience of, a melodramatic expression of a certain narrative. So yeah, I mean, he can be taken in many different ways.
Thank you, ma'am. The paper reading and the whole discussion was very much thought-provoking and it was very much informative in nature. And thanks to everyone who joined us to make this discussion a successful one. Thanks a lot from Team TFO.
Thank you everyone for engaging with me on this discussion about the film. And yeah, thanks to everyone who just even pointed out things that I didn't even notice.
Thank you, Jenisha. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
See you next week.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Hope to meet you all in the next week.